more minimal in terms of waste. But I just take the corkscrew and I go right through the wax. This one actually had the wax. I go right through the wax, just like you would with the cork, and then you just pull it right up. And then once it gets to the point where it's kind of up a little bit, you just brush it off. You can blow it off, depending if you're in a group of family or, and so then I just take that off. And then one quick thing I do, because I try to emulate whenever I drink wine, especially Pinot Noir, because Pinot Noir is delicate, it's ethereal, and it's so vibrant. And all these little beautiful aromatic esters that come to life are easily covered if anything is off. So I even take a glass that I polish at home. My water source is good. My cupboard is good, but there's still a chance that there's some dust or soap or something. So I always vinify my glasses, which is just taking a little bit. And a little trick of the trade, if you have like 10 glasses to vinify, I take a little bit like this and I add some water to it. And by adding water, you can go a lot further. And so I just vinify the glass just to take out any particulate matter that might be there. And so you're really priming the glass so that what you have is 100% wine and no chlorine from the water or anything like that.
Martin's looking on. That's wasted wine, Martin, isn't it? That's just.
It is. I'm looking at it in disgust.
Yes.
Well, we could drink your vinification wine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you have a dog or a cat, they can enjoy the wine as well. So I'm just going to pour a glass just a bit.
Carlo?
Yes.
Carlo, just out of interest, opening the wax tops, another way that people can do it without it falling apart, I use the regular foil cutters and I cut the top off with foil cutter and then pull it out. So I only have to finish up with 2 complete pieces.
Yeah, that's another way. And I think you're much more detailed that way. We just barely dip the top into the wax just to seal it and to prevent anything from happening. But yeah, that's another way. And it's a little bit softer of a wax. It's not like, Raveno or something that breaks into a billion pieces and creates like a big mess. So Sissy, I don't know if you want to pull up, I'll just give a little bit of history. And I know talking about wine and the inspiration, and I'm so inspired by Burgundy and by the group that we all, I know by being a part of this group that we all are deeply in love with Pinot Noir. We're deeply in love with Burgundy. I am as well. And so just to give you a little bit of history on Raen, there's a little kind of some pictures, and let us know if you can see them when they pop up. But my family has been in the what's that, Sissy?
Tom has me disabled, so I cannot share my screen currently.
If we're not able to, then we can just then we'll just talk about it. Perfect. So
sorry,
Tom, maybe you can. I don't even know. I mean, share.
No, it happens all the time, and the images are just totally fanfare. We don't need them. We can imagine, and I think we've all been to Burgundy. Although I do want you all to come to the Sonoma Coast at some point in time once this whole COVID thing lifts, it's so beautiful. But a little history, brief history. My family, 2019 marks 100 years for my family in wine. And we've been very much a part of that. You fall down, you get back up kind of story. The first one was that my great-grandfather came over through Ellis Island from Italy. We were in a relatively poor town, and there's no job opportunities. And so my great-grandfather took a one-way ticket with his brother to Virginia, Minnesota, where we worked in the iron ore mines. And then there was a mining collapse that ended up killing my grandfather's brother. And my great-grandfather, said, "This is not for me." And so we quickly got out of the iron ore mines, and we started a boarding house and a saloon. And we served wine and pastas and delicious. My great-grandmother was an incredible cook. And then Prohibition hit in 1919 and put us out of business. And so there was a big loophole, and imagine that we in America voted this ridiculous law into place ourselves. We did it to ourselves. It's like all the ridiculous things we do to ourselves. That was one of the most. But in 1919, there was a loophole because the government was not willing to go against the sacraments, so it was not willing to go against the church or against medicinal practices, against medicine. And so you can make up to 4 barrels of wine per household for sacramental reasons. So everyone during Prohibition became very religious. My family got into grape shipping. We moved to California, which was where the best grapes were coming from. And we got into grape shipping. And the consumption of wine literally doubled during this time from 1919 to 1933, which was way too long for Prohibition, but allowed for my family to find a path and get into wine. And so 1919 marks our first vintage, or our first harvest, I should say. And during this time, my great-grandfather was able to see all the areas of California, from the Sierra foothills, the Central Valley, the coast, Napa, Sonoma, etc. And upon repeal in 1933, my grandfather Robert said, Napa is the best fruit. We're going to go to Napa and we're going to begin to make wine. And so we bottled our first bottlings of wine, apart from the house wine, was in 1933 at Sunny St. Helena. We partnered with another family there and began bottling wine. In 1943, my great-grandfather Cesare and my family were able to buy a winery called Charles Krug, which is now known as the oldest winery in Napa. It was founded in 1861. And then in 1962, my grandfather Robert went on a trip to Bordeaux and Burgundy. And he visited with the Grand Crus. He visited with the first growths, and he asked them, what are you doing in the vineyards? What are you doing in the cellar? And they told him, Bob will tell you everything, just please don't tell our neighbors. He said, who's this guy from California? And so he came back from this trip and he said, you know, we have the soil, we have the climate. I have a bunch of rocks here, by the way. We have the soil, we have the climate. Look at these crystals, they're quite amazing from these vineyards. But we have the soil, the climate, the know-how to make wines that can sit with the great wines of the world. We just have to invest in the vineyard. We have to invest in the cellar. This investment came at a difference between my grandfather and his brother. And so in 1965, oh, hey, looks like we've got something going on. So in 1965, my grandfather was asked to leave Charles Krug. And so here's a little bit of history here, but was asked to leave Charles Krug. And so in 65, you know, you fall down, you get back up. In 1966, he began Robert Mondavi Winery with the goal of making wines that could sit alongside the great wines of the world. As time progressed at Robert Mondavi, we learned that Napa Valley is better suited for Cabernet. It really is a better climate. It's a little warmer, thicker skin, smaller berries, needs a little warmer of a climate. Whereas my father had fallen deeply in love with Pinot Noir. And you can see here, there's the Charles Krug Burgundy, which is, as you guys all know, way back when, if it was Pinot Noir, it was called Burgundy. If it was Chardonnay, it was called Chablis. If it was Sangiovese, it was called Chianti. If it was Cabernet, it was Bordeaux. Or if it was a blend of varieties, Claret. And so over time, we were actually the first winery. So you can see the 44 Krug my great-grandfather and my grandfather made and produced. And then in 1966, my grandfather said, we're not going to call this another place. We're going to call it what it is. And so we were the first winery to say Pinot Noir. This is Pinot Noir. This is Cabernet. This is, Sauvignon Blanc, etc. And so my father fell deeply in love with Pinot Noir, with Burgundy. He became friends with Henri Jaillet. In fact, I had visited Henri Jaillet several times in Burgundy, and Henri Jaillet had visited my father and tasted through his barrels of Pinot Noir. And he became friends with also Gerard Potel, which Henri Jaillet is iconic in wine, period. He is one of the incredible producers of Pinot Noir, but his counterpart, so Henri Jaillet was about destemming and wines of flesh and energy. And on the other side, there was Gerard Potel. Gerard Potel was of Le Pousse d'Or, and he had Le Pousse d'Or up until 1998. Both same generation, And Gerard Patel was the one who taught people like Jacques Cess and Aubert de Valenne how to do whole cluster fermentation. So he really was one of the, not pioneers, but the really great whole cluster producers of Pinot Noir, of whole cluster, because whole cluster really is a much more ancient practice than destemming. Destemming is a much more modern day practice. So needless to say, my father was deeply in love with Pinot Noir. He planted the seed in Dante and I. And here are some of the inspirations from here, from California, that my family had produced, and they're quite lovely. And I would love to share these wines with you all when you come out this way. There's fewer bottles, so I normally don't travel with them, but I'll bring some out next time. We can open some wines in London, which will be a lot of fun. So this is shows you kind of our geographical areas. We hired Brenna Quibley, who's an incredible geologist, and she's done a lot of the mapping of Burgundy for people like Paul Wasserman. She's mapped quite a bit of the Loire and now Piedmont, and she came and did our geological maps. And just to show you the proximity that we are to the ocean, with Fort Seaview on the left and up, and then down below the Freestone Occidental Bodega and Royal St. Robert Vineyards. And by the way, please, I'm sorry, open the wines, begin swirling. How many have the 2018 or the 2019, or excuse me, 2018 and 2017 wines?
I think we all pretty much all have two wines in front of us: the Royal St. Robert and the Bodega, both from the 18 vintage.
Oh, wonderful! Oh, that's I love the 18 vintage. I really, truly love the 18 vintage. So just to show you the proximity, both wines we're going to be enjoying tonight are from the lower right portion of that map. This picture I wanted to share just to show just how gorgeous the Sonoma Coast is. I feel like the best wines in the world come from absolutely beautiful places. And I think there's a reason behind that. It's first you have the rocks, the soil, the earth that's below. And then you have the microflora and the macroflora of the environment around the vineyard, that climate. And so here you can see the trees. We have a slide showing all the flowers, but it's just an incredible microflora. And that microflora ends up in our wine as it's brought into the cellar with on the dust of the grape. So a quick talk about our farming practices, because I think that the farming practices is once you have a great site, first it's about a great site, a Grand Cru site at the highest level. Once you have that, it's about the farming. This is the next most important step. And so we at Raen farm as a cross between a permaculture, biodynamic, and organic. Have you guys heard of permaculture farming? So it's
Might want to explain it, yes.
Yeah, the permaculture is, I think it's the holy grail of farming. It is where you use no chemicals at all, and you essentially allow nature to self-balance the farm. So if you have, in that previous picture, there's a bluebird box. We have blue-green sharpshooters on the Sonoma Coast, which are these little insects that are the vector for Pierce disease, which once they bite a vine, it literally kills the vine. And so they can hop, they don't like the way vines taste, but they could easily, in a quick pass, kill 3 or 4 vines. And so bluebirds happen to love blue-green sharpshooters. So we have these bluebird boxes, and I'm not kidding you guys. We put these, the first year we put the bluebird boxes in, we were walking away and we just see a bluebird whoop, land right on top. There's something, they just know that this is a place where they can nest. And so we have bluebird boxes, and they've helped incredibly on keeping the blue-green sharpshooter population at bay. We use all sorts of native wildflowers to bring in beneficial insects to kick out the bad. That's another permaculture practice. We have owl boxes to help us with gophers and all sorts of, we actually even partnered with the Sonoma County Wildlife Rescue to bring in animals that will help balance out the other animals that we don't want on the farm. So that's a permaculture. If we can't find a permaculture remedy, we go to a biodynamic remedy. And if we can't find a biodynamic remedy, we base out at organic. And we are a regenerative no-till farm, which is important, I think, for the microbiome of the soils. In the biodynamics, we believe deeply in the lunar phases. So we prune based on lunar phases. We rack the wines based on lunar phases. We also bottle based on lunar phases, but we don't pick based on moon phases. But we do on the cork put the moon phase, the date and time of when we picked, and the moon phase, because we're observing that. So it's kind of a fun note. So we can go to the next slide, Sissy. So here's just a picture of Royal St. Robert on the right. Royal St. Robert's under 4 miles from the ocean, so very close to the ocean. You can see this beautiful sour grass that's a native cover crop that regenerates every single year naturally. This cover crop brings in beneficial insects. It also helps aerate the soils, retain moisture in the soils, and just adds a beautiful amount of kind of that aromatic flora to the overall microflora of the vineyard. You have on the left the crimson clover, and then above that the white clover, which are all native. It's the different generations within Royal St. Robert. And you can see in this picture the owl boxes in the back that we have, which this year they have both been nested, I'm happy to say. So we have baby owls right now on the farm, which is kind of exciting. So in the next slide, you can see another one of our little permaculture remedies. This is Doris the bobcat, named after Doris, who started the Sonoma County Wildlife Rescue. And Doris, she's incredible. The human Doris, who started the Wildlife Rescue. She called me and she said, "Hey, I have a bobcat that's been orphaned. We'd like to release it. Could we release it on your farm?" And we had been asking her if we could release foxes, bobcats, and coyotes on the farm to deal with gophers. And so this is a picture of her when she was first orphaned and brought into the center. And then we released her when she was bigger and strong. And the wonderful thing, it's been interesting. I was just talking with a viticulturalist this morning about how they've seen more wildlife this year than ever before. And I think that this is because of COVID. Even in areas as desolate as the Sonoma Coast and as Napa, that we're seeing more wildlife. And so we released Doris in between Bodega and Royal St. Robert. There's a little forest between the two. And we released her there and we hadn't seen her. And I was a little bit worried that, you never know how they're going to survive. And I'm really happy to report that just after bud break and getting into spring, right when those yellow flowers were just popping everywhere, I saw her when I was driving up to the vineyard. And then days later, one of our neighbors actually shot a video of her hunting and capturing a gopher in Royal St. Robert. So the exact thing we were hoping and dreaming that she would do, she's doing. So it's really this symbiotic relationship of biodiversity, which is ever important. And
Carlo, how big is Royal St. Robert as a vineyard?
We're 10 acres of vines. Our entire holdings of vines at Raen are 18.5. So that would be about 7 hectares of vineyard. We farm and make and produce 7 hectares worth of wine every year. And it goes up and down as with Mother Nature in terms of how many bottles we make each year. So
I now see that on the bottle. If we're not all drinking it, we should be.
Yes.
It's a...
So cheers, you guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.
So just a little quick background. Royal St. Robert, 140 million year old ancient soils, ocean. It's an ancient seabed. And this bottling is dedicated to my grandfather, Robert. He was not royal, he was not a saint, but we looked up to him as he was in the vineyards in the cellar. And we always felt he could walk on wine. And he was the largest and greatest inspiration to Dante and I from a philosophical standpoint in wine and life. And each bottle of Raen has a dedication to him at the top where it says RGM for Robert Gerald Mondavi, heart and soul. Because he'd always say, you have to put your heart and soul into whatever you do in life if you want to excel. And he would say this multiple times, if not every day, multiple times. He really believed that in order to excel in life, you have to pour your heart and soul into whatever you do. It's never truer now with all the wild things we're going through right now. But it's a dedication to him. And this bottling, Royal St. Robert, is a bottling from our cellar to honor our grandfather. So a quick talk about our winemaking practices and our philosophy, and it ties back to the name Raen. So if you look at Raen, it's a unique spelling. And Raen stands for the idea that the rain that falls in the fields becomes wine naturally without doing anything at all. That if you literally do nothing, the alchemy or miracle of water becoming wine happens in nature. And so I remember hearing this story. My father told me this story when I was very young. It hit me like a ton of bricks because it was like, wow, wine really is so just natural and beautiful, and it really is a part of our life. And so if you think about it, it rains on the fields, the water filters through the rocks, the vines drink, the sun sweetens it, and then on the outside of a grape, Sissy, wait, can you go to the next slide? Mm-hmm. On the outside of the grape, on the cluster on the left, there's a wax, and you can see in the wax, there's the parts where I've touched that cluster and it's shiny, and then the parts where I have not. That wax is called the bloom, and within the bloom, it collects all the resin from the flowers, the grasses, the trees, and within the bloom, there's over 50,000 individual yeast cells. So literally, each little berry has a tremendous amount of native yeast. And so if you do nothing at all, and we see this every year in our vineyards, we see a bee will come bite the grape open, or a bird pecks it open. The juice mixes with the skins, sugar plus yeast yields alcohol right there without intervention. The rain that had fallen on the field that was sweetened by the sun becomes wine. And so we wanted something that would stand for our dedication to purity in wine. And so the unique spelling R-A-E-N stands for our dedication to research in agriculture and enology naturally. So it's a double meaning. So all of Raen wines are natively fermented. We do not add yeast. We do not allow yeast in the winery. We do not filter, and we are striving for purity. We're also a whole cluster house, which I think you can see in this photograph, the before fermentation on the left, and then on the right, there's the cluster. That cluster is a fully fermented cluster. And the reason why we do whole cluster fermentations is because of the aromatic esters and the lift and the brightness. And I love the romance of whole cluster being the ancient way of making wine, but it really is tying back to that aromatic zest. And it ties back to actually a visit my grandfather, Robert, took my brothers and sisters and I on in 2002. And there was a day that changed my life. And I'll drop some names right now just because I'm in a group that will know these names. But we started the day off with Claude Leflevre. She is a magical woman, was a magical woman. And we talked about farming. And actually, Burgundy is Burgundy at the level it is because of the women of Burgundy. It's because of Lalubis Leroy and because of Claude Leflevre. Claude Leflevre was one of the first ones to pioneer biodynamic farming. I'm a huge fan of her wines, a huge fan of her. And I was able to become friends with her after this visit. So we started with Claude Leflevre at Domaine Leflevre and Pouligny-Montrachet. And then we sidetracked over to Vosne Romani, where we visited with Aubert de Valland, walking the vineyards with Aubert and visiting Romani Conti. And then there was a moment on this visit that totally changed my life. And that was in the cellar when the first bung was pulled out of the barrel and we thieved out some wine. And I just remember being able to smell it before it even got close to my glass. And then once it was just exploding with aromatics of rose petals and tea and forest floor and just ripe fruit. And it was such an aromatic, intoxicating experience that I was wondering, okay, well, what makes this terroir so special? And the more I learned, of course, this terroir is incredibly special, and Romani Conti is Romani Conti and will always be Romani Conti. But I learned that Romani Conti was doing whole cluster fermentations. And so I said, okay, well, no one else is doing whole cluster fermentations. Well, it was, there's maybe 5 at the time. If it was Romani Conti, Domaine Leroy, Domaine Piriac, Domaine de Larlo, Domaine Dujac, a few of the whole cluster houses that were always above 75% whole clusters. So I said, what are these stems? What do the stems do to the wine that give it this lift? Why are they so aromatically incredible and texturally pleasing? And what I learned was that, and when Dante and I began Raen, we knew that not all vineyards would be suited for whole cluster and not all vintages would be suited. So we began experimenting to see if our vineyards were suited and if the vintages were suited. And we did a number of experiments, and we actually ended up regretting destemming every time we destemmed. And here's the story why. What we discovered was that it's not what the stems do to the wine itself, it's what the stems do to the grape itself. Because you can see here before fermentation, and you can see below after fermentation, you have full intact berries clinging on to the stem. And so that fermentation that happened inside that berry happened intracellularly and enzymatically inside the berry, creating an order of magnitude greater aromatic esters that otherwise, if it was open, would have volatilized off through the headspace. It's very different than carbonic fermentation because it is open top, but yet we are getting in that order of magnitude greater all those aromatic esters. And so we love whole cluster. This is the journey, and very much inspired by the wines of Loire and Romanée-Conti and some of the wonderful whole cluster houses of Burgundy. And also I love, just as a generality, from the good houses, Syrahs and Grenaches like Rayas that are whole cluster, or Clap or Alamand from the Rhone of Syrah that's whole cluster. I just tend to love the aromatic vibrancy that a whole bunch of gives to the wine. So I spent too much on that, sorry.
Carlo, should we see what the group think of this wine?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
my view, and I'm a little biased, but I honestly think it's the finest New World Pinot I've ever tried. I'm just going to throw that out there. It's a big statement. I think these 18s are superb. Martin, have you got a view? I mean,
we started
with wines, or?
Yeah, no, I mean, we started with Bodega, and the finesse, and I think the fruit, the structure, I mean, and how approachable it is, and it's amazing to drink. It feels like there's more powwow between the Royal St. Robert, and I mean, if I didn't know any better, I mean, I would say we're in Burgundy somewhere. It's amazing wines, and that's not necessarily, everything shouldn't be compared to Burgundy. I think what's fantastic here is how great they are now, and then if we somehow had a time machine and we could go ahead in time and see where would they be in 10 years, because I have a feeling like you're going to get a lot more secondary flavors and notes starting to come up. That's just going to be, because already now you're getting a lot of that, actually. It's not just the fruit. There's a lot of, like, you know, the forest and, you know, the tea and these amazing notes to it. I mean, it's incredible. And the structure of the wine is beautiful. Acidity. Amazing wine.
Thank you.
Philip, can you talk? Are you on mute? No, Philip, go for it.
Can I talk?
Yes, you can.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, in fact, it's interesting. I've been drinking the Royal St. Robert, which is, to me, is more up front, and it's more advanced and more ready to drink than the Occidental. To me, the Occidental has a little more structure, a little bit more reserved, more linear, if you will, in the wine. So I'm going to guess that you've got some different clones working here.
Yes, yeah, it's a great guess. And also, you know, the wonderful thing is there's a small forest that separates Bodega and Royal St. Robert. Bodega is the oldest meter by meter planting on the Sonoma Coast. Yeah. And it's so steep and the turnaround is so gnarly that we have to farm it all by hand. So it's a labor of love. And it does have that forest floor. It really is properly forest floor. It's a wine that I think will benefit with time. And Royal St. Robert gets a little bit more of that sun exposure. It's a little bit more open, and it does have a little bit more of that, I think, approachability early on. The two wines, from a colonial perspective, are predominantly for Bodega. It's predominantly Dijon clones. Yeah. And you know, I love the genotype. I would love to plant in some heritage clones, but it's mostly Dijon. And the phenotype is the most important. These vines are older, more mature for California standards, being that phylloxera was in the 80s and 90s. And these were planted right in the end of kind of our phylloxera wave. And Royal St. Robert is much more clonally diverse. We have Swan, we have Mount Eden clone, we have Calera, we have some Dijon clones in there as well, 115, 667.
Do you have any Pommard?
There is a small amount of Pommard in the Bodega, but but Royal St. Robert is more Yeah, there's no Pomard in St. Robert.
What I love about them is the lightness. I mean, they're light. My congratulations, you're making a stunning glass of wine that's only 12 or 12 and a half, 13 degrees of alcohol. So I feel we could drink both bottles by the time we finish dinner tonight.
Lovely. I love it. Yeah, we you know, when I worked in Burgundy, it was so surprising. I was so like blown away that you know, 12 and a half, we were lucky to get 12.5% alcohol. A lot of times it was a degree or two below that, and the acidity was fleeting, and there was a lot of mildew pressure, and there were storms coming, and so you picked to try to kind of navigate the waters. Whereas on the Sonoma Coast, when we have 12.5 degrees of potential alcohol or 13 degrees of potential alcohol, we have the perfect acidity. The fruit is brilliant. There's very little mildew pressure, and this is in generalizations from vintages that I've experienced. And there's 2 weeks of good weather. And so I'm looking at this fruit and I'm saying, we have to pick this. This is perfect. You can't, this is like the most dream-like fruit you could ever imagine. And because of the beautiful weather that we have after, oftentimes people will let it continue to ripen. And so you get these bigger, richer wines, which some people love. But for me, I really prefer vibrancy and freshness and delicacy and good acidity. And so we pick when we feel like the fruit is incredibly ripe by most world standards, but by some standards it would be on the early side. And so we're also on the very, where we are in an area where it's so cool that we're lucky in some vintages to get to 12.5, 13% alcohol.
But that makes Martin's nice point about acidity, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Picking early and it's cool. The other thing that I discovered, and I think that I'm going to like the Freestone the better of the two long term, is I took them both out. My cellar is at 12 degrees, and I took them both out, and they were quite close to 12, which is not a bad I thought was not a bad temperature. But by the time they've opened up in the glass to say 15, it's an absolute world of difference in the flavors.
Yeah, I love to start the wines off cooler at 12 degrees like that, and then let them warm up a bit more to room temperature. That's one of the biggest. People talk about decanting wines and all these things. I think temperature is the most important element to enjoying great red wine and great white wine.
Not particularly red.
So cheers, you guys. So a couple of the details we have on the bottles, the acreage as well. You can see that it's only 1.8. I don't know if this will focus. 1.8 acres there. So very small production of bodega. A bit more of Royal St. Robert with 10 acres, which would be about, what would that be? About 0.5 hectares, and about 3 hectares, 3.5 hectares of Royal St. Robert is kind of the production size. And do you guys see on the cork that we put the date, the time, and the moon phase on there? We put that on there as the date, time, and moon phase of when we pick. And sometimes we pick in different intervals as well.
Carlo, how many bottles do you make of this?
So the pendulum swings just like almost any wine region, just between with Mother Nature. So in like 15, for example, we were hard to get 100 cases of bodega. In vintages like 18, which was truly what a wonderful vintage 18 is and was. We were able to get more of a normal crop, so just over 200 cases. So we can see as much as 50% ups and downs depending on Mother Nature. And as a whole,
that's out of how many acres? So your 18, yield per acre must be quite low.
They're pretty low. Yeah, very low. So 1.8 acres. We got like in 15 we were getting about a ton an acre, which is very, very little. In 2018, we were able to get more like 2 tons an acre, 2.5 tons an acre, which is like Grand Cru Burgundy levels. And so, yeah, 18 was a wonderful, wonderful vintage on all fronts. We had a beautiful winter with lots of rain that was able to replenish the soils and nourish the vines. Spring was even, set was even. The growing season was beautiful and cool, not too hot, but looking wonderful. And then as we got towards August, in August, normally we see this kind of 2 weeks to 3 weeks of drier weather and warmer weather that just kind of brings everything into focus and really lifts kind of the sugars and brings the acidity right into focus. And that's very typical in California or the Sonoma Coast. But in 2018, it was the opposite. When that ripening normally kind of occurs, it went the opposite. It got very cool and very foggy, and it allowed for very long maturation. So we have our most phenologically ripe fruit with very low bricks. So we didn't see that sugar increase because of all the sunshine, because photosynthetic energy on the vine is the most important in terms of sugar ripeness. It's not temperature degree units, or it's really about sunshine. And so because it was foggy, we were able to keep our sugars in check. And because it was cool, we retained the acidity. And so we had this long maturation of fruit on the vine, which allowed for wines of density, but elegance and freshness. And 18 has really become one of my all-time favorite vintages for the Sonoma Coast. It's a very special vintage. And I think we'll see a lot of great producers that are our neighbors coming from the 18 vintage. And for also wineries that tend to make bigger, more rich wines, I love vintages like 18 because it forces them to be a little bit leaner, a little bit fresher, a little bit more vibrant, which is nice. Yeah. So between the two wines, Bodega and Rose St. Robert, I tend to always think of Bodega as that kind of rose petal, black tea, forest floor, but more exotic. Yeah. It's more of that exotic exuberance. It's more of that kind of that rose petal black tea, but exotic, but really you're properly in the humidity of the forest floor. And for me, Rose St. Robert is kind of where that forest edge meets the meadow. You get that grass and dry grass from the meadow, and the forest floor, those crunchy leaves, you get that earth kind of note. And it's more Western spice box and kind of that wild red strawberry and black cherry and wet rock minerality with rose petals and black tea as well. Kind of the two things I see, but yeah. What are you guys' thoughts? Tom, any thoughts on the two wines? How are they showing?
Paul Van Moren, can I speak to you? You've tried, I think, the 15, 16, 17, and 18 now recently. Do you have a view on what these 18s are similar to what you've had recently? Closer in style to the 16 than the 17, or?
Yeah, I think so. I've only I haven't tried the Bodega 18 because I didn't bring it home. But after being introduced to the 17, I went out and ferreted out a few other vintages. I mean, they're all amazing. I've gone back in now and just opened the 17 of the Royal St. Robert, and it's beautiful as well. I mean, they're just so drinkable and enjoyable. Now I'm going to struggle to keep them.
Well, Carlo, this does bring to one of the bigger questions is how will your wines age? Your first vintage was 2015.
Yeah, I think I'm always envious of the cellar ability of England because of the infrastructure that you have at Stannery and that just the collections. I would love to see people lay Raen down for much longer. Here in most markets, people drink, I think, the wines far too soon. I think in England, you guys are the leaders, even over France, over Italy, on how to store wines and when to drink them. I love older wines. I love mature wines. So I have my own personal kind of, I would love to see this in 10, 15, 20 years. But I also understand that, if you drink nothing but mature wines, sometimes you want that fruit and flower and you want the intensity. So it really depends. The wines will age alongside the great wines of Burgundy. I've seen this with terroirs that were not nearly as special, I think. If you look at some of the wines from the early 60s and 70s, you can blind them alongside their counterparts of Burgundy, and it's incredible. I think we understand winemaking at a higher level now. We understand farming at a higher level now, and I think the wines are better than they've ever been. And so I do believe that these wines will age, but it's a personal preference. You know, I describe the wines as they age as it's if you picture like a tight flower, like a rose with all the green kind of protecting the flowers inside, that's kind of right where they are. They're young right now, and as it begins to open, you get that more of that floral fruit and flower, and it's just in its youth, it's fruit, it's flower primary and dominated. And as the wines age, let's say past 10 years, you start to see some drying of the fruit, drying of the flower. And then as you get into that 15 to 20 year mark, you really start to see petals falling away. And I think if you look at wines being stored properly, and you talk about some of those Thomas Jefferson era bottles that have been discovered that were hidden behind walls, and that there was still a little fruit and flower left in from the 1780s. I think that, you know, stored properly, and if you like that kind of underlying, that real earthy characteristic that these wines will still be singing a note for many decades. But I tend to like my wines personally on the upswing. So within 10 to 20 years, I can say I genuinely love white Burgundy, red Burgundy, Bordeaux, the Rhone, Piemonte, California. I love all of those in that 10 to 20 year, but that's also getting more into that tertiary, secondary underlying notes. 5 years.
Good value.
Yeah, I mean, what do you guys all? What do you prefer? Do you prefer more of the wines with age and that like later complexity, or more of the primary, fresh, vibrant notes of the younger wines?
My view is with Pinot, you get this early capture up young, and they're vibrant and fresh and full of energy, and I love this stage. And then I feel you've got a sort of a window of 2 to 3 years to capture it now, and then wait for 5 years. Put it away for 5 years, and then bring them out after. So that's 8 to 10 years old. 10 years old, and again a good time to look at them then. And I suspect your wines will be dreamy after 10 years. I'll be surprised if any of us have the patience to hold them for so long. They are so appealing at this stage, and I'd be surprised if they do close down, because they've got so much vibrancy. And if you look at the wines of Henri Roch, do you know Domaine Prieuré Roch, and Philippe Pacolet as well is another good example of whole bunch Pinot. Those wines tend to drink very, very well for the first 15 years of their lives, and then there's a question as to how well, particularly with Pacolet's wines, don't see any sulfur, so they can fade away. But I wonder if your wines will be appealing for 15 years in a beautiful way.
So Carlo, are you holding back any of your wines to see how well they age?
Of course.
Yeah, I'm doing that this is something my father really taught me. I mean, is to have a good library. And so there were a couple of, like 15, we oversold the vintage. We were just learning, but we've now been able to put under lock and key a fair amount of each wine. And so we have a very good library of all the wines where Dante and I and our team, we're not allowed to really go in there and jump into the wines. And the idea is to wait 10 years and then begin, and actually really is to be able to share them with collectors and friends. And so one thing I want to do down the road when I come back is to bring some of the older bottles. We might wait a couple of years so that there's a really good little bit of library, but to show the wines, how they evolve and how they age. But libraries are so important. And that's one thing also in Burgundy. I loved it. The domain I worked at in Burgundy, I worked at Domaine Dujac, and the library and generosity with the library was something I'll never forget. And also with the other wines that they collect. And so it's something that I would like to emulate at Raen as well, and have that ability to open old wines and enjoy them. And with you all as well. That's years down the road, we're going to open all of these and the earlier vintages as well together as my hopes.
Okay, thank you. Second question, if I may.
Yes.
I have a relative who is intolerant to sulfites. And as a consequence, he finds it very difficult to find wines that haven't had sulfites added as part of the finings process. So do you keep your wines literally natural, as you were talking about, or do you fine with substances, whether they be egg whites or whatever?
Yeah, we don't fine at all. Use no fining agents. We use sulfur in the vineyards for mildew and ODM and all the different mildew pressures that exist. In the cellar, we use a very small amount of sulfur. It's well under 50 parts, which is a very little amount. And we do it one time later on in the evolution of the wine. So not before fermentation, not after, but well into kind of going into the spring. And it's one time, one addition, one small addition. During fermentation, there's all sorts of hydrogen sulfides that are created. So it's not just sulfur. There's kind of sulfur naturally occurring in the wines. But I have friends I'm sensitive to sulfur as well. Just having worked with it in cellars and in the vineyards, I can't stand the stuff. So I'm very, very sparse and sparing with it. But I will say that I've found that for people that do have lower tolerances to sulfur, like I do myself, is to wait a couple of years. And normally, I would say that the 15 and the 17 probably have 0 parts per million of sulfur free in the wine itself. So as it ages, it breaks down. There's your totals and your free. And so older wines tend to have lower parts, but then also depending on the domain, I very much am not opposed to sulfur, but I'm very much very sparingly use it. And sulfur I would say that there's far less sulfur in both bottles of wine that we have right now than there are in like 5 dried apricots or in cheese, for example. And it can be, I was talking to a senior research scientist at MIT, and we were talking about the health benefits of sulfur in moderation. But the key is to not have it be something that you can pick out in a wine, or have it be even something that really is physically present in the wine. You want it to be basically invisible. And yeah, my take on it is I like to have it after bottling, when we release it, to be as close to 0 parts per million free is where we try to be.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Carlo, I have an answer to the earlier question about, am I?
Yeah, go on.
No, fine.
You're fine. You're great.
No, you're not me.
I prefer your young wines at lunchtime and older, more mature wines at dinner. And I think there's a nice kind of combination. At lunchtime, it's lighter, the air is brighter, the mood is lighter. But by the time you get to evening, you want something that's more something you spend more time talking about as opposed to drinking.
That is one. I totally agree with you. I 100% would. Now that you say that, I'm going to use that over and over again, because it's totally true. In the afternoon, you want something a little fresh, a little vibrant. In the evening, something a little bit more nuanced, which is that's really well put. I'm going to use that one. Thank you.
Carlo, in the recent Jancis Robinson article, I don't know if you saw it, you spoke about, I've got it here in front of me, a smart electric compact tractor. Now, this is a new project of yours that you're working on? How?
Yeah, just a little background on the tractor. I never thought in a million years I would be a founder in a tractor company. I'm actually still surprised I am. But I started, when my family sold Robert Mondavi Winery, we actually grew to be quite a large winery. And we owned a lot of land in Napa and a lot of land in Sonoma and throughout California. And when the farming baton went from my family's hands to the new company that had bought us, I recognize in the hills, during late winter, early spring, the hills are lush and green. And when I was driving to my grandfather and father's house, there was this electric orange strip underneath the vines. And I said, what on earth is that electric orange strip? It was like these grasses were perfectly frozen in place. And so I asked my father, what were they doing? And he said, they're chemically mowing. So they're using a chemical like glyphosate or Roundup and to kill the weeds. And I said, wow, why would you spray something that kills the weeds right under the root, right under the vine where the root is? Wouldn't that affect the wine and the farm and everything? And I began researching it. And in farming and generalization, you know, you don't tell other people what to do. You don't, neighbors, it's their land. You know, you kind of stay out of everyone's way and you just try to maintain a good friendship. And so that changed a bit. I still am trying to do this in a very nice and kind and elegant way, but when I learned about the environmental impact of these herbicides, so Roundup is one of them. It's a Monsanto chemical people use in their garden and they use in corn and soy, and it's sprayed everywhere. But I learned about its impact. So there's the human health impact, which is terrible. There's the farm impact, the community impact, but the big impact that I was saying I want to speak up for was the environmental impact. So since the introduction of Roundup, this herbicide that many farms around the world, by the way, Champagne's the worst, Burgundy's terrible, Piemonte, where my girlfriend makes wine's awful. This is a global epidemic, a global problem. And so since the introduction of this chemical Roundup in 1974, the monarch population of butterflies has declined by 99%, and they're on the brink of extinction. This chemical, along with neonicotinoids, has led to colony collapse with the bees, et cetera. And so I started this project called the Monarch Challenge, trying to make Napa and Sonoma herbicide free by going out to farmers and talking about the effect of these chemicals. And it was incredible. I go talk to these farms and people with their tears in their eyes, they say, I had no idea. I didn't know that it was bad for us, bad for the environment, et cetera. But oftentimes the conversation would end by them saying, but I've got to put food on the table for my family. I've got to put my kids through college. I'm barely making it as is. I can't afford to go the more organic route. And so I realized we had to change things. So I started the conversation. And then one day I was driving down the freeway and Tesla had come out with this new autonomous, package, which is crazy. There's a mode on it called ludicrous mode, and it will pass cars autonomously at like 70 miles per hour. And I was thinking, my God, if a car can go 70 miles per hour down a freeway, passing and changing throughout lanes, certainly we can get a tractor to go 2 and 3 miles per hour down a vineyard row and spray autonomously and do all the different practices autonomously. And so I began looking for engineers. A friend of mine who's one of the co-founders of Lyft connected me with a good friend of his. And we, along with 2 other brilliant engineers, founded Monarch Tractor. It's an electric autonomous tractor, and it's going to make farming organically, biodynamically, regeneratively, and all of the really beautiful, niche, elegant ways of farming cost as much as today's conventional costs and without the carbon footprint. Because the big farms have always said, well, we farm conventionally because the carbon footprint's less. And if you think about it, if you go out and spray 1 time a month versus having to spray 4 organic passes or two organic passes, you're spending a lot. The conventional farmers are spending a lot less on diesel. And they're also creating a lot less greenhouse gases, and diesel tractors are filthy. And so by being electric, we're also able to circumnavigate the carbon footprint. And I have a brilliant group of engineers, a really wonderful team. And so we have a little project called Monarch Tractor, which is coming out next year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We're excited.
Super exciting. Well, Carlo, we've hit the hour, and the time has flown by. I'm not going to say again, these 18s are superb. What a treat it is to taste them. They only landed in the UK, I think 3 weeks ago. So obviously the first time I've tried them, and I'm delighted to see how well they're showing at this very, very young age. Martin, thank you for putting this all together.
You mean sending the email and then you and Carlo sorted it all out? Yes. So I'll take the credit.
And Philip, lovely to see you.
It's been a great pleasure the evening, Tom, and thank you for thinking of it. And Carlo, as always, fab to see you. Fab to see you and talk with you.
Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you for. I feel great. I cannot wait to be back there with you all and attend another dinner with another winemaker where I can be a part of the Shen, this club that I'm in. I love being in, and thank you guys, Martin, Philip, everybody. Thank you and Tom, thank you for organizing this. And it's a pleasure to be here with you all. And I hope you all stay safe and we get through this whole wild time together quickly, so we can actually touch glasses.
Yes, exactly.
and spend time together. So thank you for this, you guys. I appreciate it.
Carlo, you're a star, Carlo. Thank you for your time, Carlo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye, Tom.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Thank you so much.